Good evening, members of the public, to the December 11th, 2024 monthly business meeting of the Open Space Board of Trustees. Tonight, Trustee Carol is unable to join us, and we have Trustee Glenn joining us by Zoom. Thank you, Sarah. We'll start with calling the roll. Trustee Glenn,
Present.
Robinson, and Zuckerman.
Right here.
And I am here. I am Michelle Estrella, the chair of the board. Okay, I'm going to move on to approval of the minutes. As usual, we will go page by page and ask for any comments or proposed changes, starting with page 1. Any? Okay.
I wasn't there, but John moved to adopt the minutes and then John seconded. Is that really what happened? Okay.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Anything else on page 1? Okay, moving on to page 2. I do have one. I'll just start out and then ask folks for other ones. In the third paragraph, the second sentence, it refers to me encouraging the board to review the 3-month calendar and contact me with ideas rather than the public. So she encouraged the board. Any other ones on second page?
Yeah, the second to last paragraph states the board noted that it was interesting that there is. So there's a typo there.
Interesting. Thank you for that.
Fourth to last paragraph, second sentence, the word they is spelled Thay. Substantively, I thought the minutes were good.
I have one more on page 2, second to last paragraph. I'm pretty sure it was explicit in the word rather than just opportunities for alternate transportation. And opportunities within our forthcoming work on strategic initiative 7C. I just want to provide that context because we're talking a lot about that these days. Okay, so I'm going to move on to page 3. Any changes there? No? Okay, seeing none, I will ask if anybody would like to move approving the minutes as amended.
Okay. I'll move to approve the November 13th Open Space Board of Trustees minutes as amended.
I will go ahead and second that and then call the roll. Sarah?
Yes. Oh,
And okay. And Harmon?
Yes.
I also approve the minutes. I'm going to assume that Brady is going to abstain to that, from that. Okay, passes unanimously with Brady abstaining.
is there any way for the camera angle? I'm just seeing Dan right now, and I'm seeing you, the rest of the trustees secondarily on the screen behind Dan, but it makes it hard for me to really follow from this view.
All right. Oh, sorry.
If it's not easy, no big deal. Please know that I can't see body language or what's happening with the trustees up there. So I'm just going on what I hear if we keep this angle, and that works for me too. But I want you to know that.
Sir, we can see 2 cameras here. I don't know if you can change the view from your Zoom.
Okay, I'll work on that.
Yeah, we want to try to fix that, Sarah.
Because we can see ourselves on the screen here.
It could be a Zoom setting thing.
Okay, I will work on that. There we go. Thank you.
Hey.
Yay.
Okay, next section is public comment for items not identified for public hearing. We don't have any public hearings tonight. So this is an opportunity for the community to speak to the board on matters that are on their minds. Do we have, is that you, Lisa? Do we have any people signed up? Oh, no, first, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead and read the rules of decorum.
The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, please visit this link. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. If you are joining in person and would like to speak during public comment or items identified for public hearing, please sign up at the table and we'll call you up to speak at the podium. If you're joining online, you can raise your hand to speak during public comment or items identified for public hearing. You can do that by using the raise hand icon or by clicking the participants icon, then the three dots on the bottom right and select raise hand.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have anybody signed up in advance to speak tonight?
We do. First, we have Jan Burton online.
Okay. Welcome, Jan.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I think 4 of the board members, and I am a City of Boulder resident, a frequent OSMP user, and a volunteer. I am a Falcon monitor in what is one of the best managed programs in the City of Boulder, I feel. I'd like to thank you all for your efforts. I know that the OSBT can require a lot of work, and sometimes it's controversial. And I'd like to thank you for all of your efforts over the last few years. Some of you I know have served for multiple years now, especially around controversial projects like CU South. I'd also like to congratulate you on as well as staff, on the North Sky Trail, which actually I voted for when I was on council in 2017, I think. I have recently learned about the Trails Challenge, which I think is really a cool thing. I've been to your website and I've looked at all the different challenges you've got. I think it's very exciting and should be promoted more within the city because I think it could be something that could get a lot of people interested. And then one other thing that I would like to maybe recommend is for staff to engage the board of trustees a bit more around budget and efficiency. I think most departments always want to get more budget and always think they don't have enough. But as a taxpayer and also a frequent visitor to the national parks, I just want to mention that Yosemite National Park in 24 has a budget of 34.6 million, and that compares to our OSMP budget of 40 million. And there may be some things that I don't see in their budget that may increase what they've got. But I just think it's something that for a very wealthy city like Boulder and with a very nice tax plan that we have with the open space is something that would be great for the two of you staff and the board to work together to develop some efficiencies and some ideas for cost cutting and that kind of thing. To send a message to the taxpayers for the next time we need to renew the taxes for open space. And with that, I would like to thank all of staff and all of the board for all your efforts. And I hope you have a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Next up, we have Giles Troughton in person.
Okay.
Good evening, trustees. Good evening. My name's Giles Troughton. First, want to start off by thanking members of the OSMP staff who met with me last week. Brian Aniker, Paul Dennison, George Greenwood. Every time I speak to somebody in OSMP, I learned something, and hopefully it was constructive from their perspective as well. Anyway, at your recent retreat, at least two of the trustees raised concerns about wildfire, including the need for a greater sense of urgency to protect the city, community engagement, and the Flagstaff management problem. Well, I'm here tonight to echo some of the problems that you guys talked about at that meeting. My agenda tonight talks about the CWPP, human-caused fire incidents, and how I think you guys might want to interact with the city council. The CWPP, first of all, I've read it. OSMP has hired somebody to implement the CWPP, so I guess that means you guys own it. The CWPP has a significant lack of fire incident data analytics associated with it. There was no data really included in that. And with all the emphasis these days on data-driven decision-making, I find that to be a really significant oversight. And if there's a reason for that, because of data quality or data hierarchy issues, we should figure out what that is and start fixing that problem now so we're not in a situation in the future. I think there is an opportunity because nationally there's a new fire incident reporting system coming into play in 2025, replacing the current system. Maybe there's an opportunity there to get everybody lined up, the different departments, in terms of reporting properly. The wildfire core team, I think personally that those meetings should be open to the public. I think it'd be a good opportunity to address transparency, education, and engagement. So that would be my recommendation. Human-caused wildfire incidents. I live downwind, downhill from Panorama Point, Flagstaff Road. I've spoken about this issue before. Thanks for installing a surveillance camera at Panorama Point. Has it helped? I'd like to know if it's helped or not. I was up there about 2 weeks ago. I was going to do a little show and tell for you guys. I collected two 30-gallon garbage bags worth of trash. That trash was alcohol, fireworks, drugs, mostly. A couple of Gatorade bottles. There are 8 permissive uses to open space. Pyrotechnics and intoxication aren't among them. So I think there's a need for greater enforcement in the areas under OSMP oversight. And I also think access to these areas ought to be limited during periods of high fire risk and danger, and I don't really see that happening today. City council interactions. Try and move through this quickly. Wildfire hardening is one of the council's top 10 priorities. They have a meeting study session tomorrow night to talk about this a little bit. I think you guys need to tell them what they need to hear. 3 quick ideas on that. Redefine the WUI. We have a very thin strip of land. Fire embers are carried miles in advance of the perimeter.
Wowza, that is quite the alarm bell. Giles, is it possible for you to email us your notes?
Absolutely.
The rest?
Get
Okay.
rid of junipers and integrate with the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to speak to us.
Thank you, Giles. Do we have anybody else?
If you're joining online and would like to speak, and raise your hand now. Lynn Siegel.
May I have the board, not the timer, in my field of view?
Apologies, we're having issues with one of our cameras, so we can't adjust that right now.
Okey doke. Where's Caroline Miller when you need her? CU South, she opposed. She revealed private discussion between Sam Weaver and I forget the name of the gal and Hal Hallstein. Regarding CU South, this is just counterintuitive for you to operate at all as a board under adverse conditions of so much development. Planning Reserve, Mackenzie Junction, Diagonal Plaza, Papelios, Macy's. I mean, you could just cover the whole city. There's apartment buildings everywhere. Hyundai, Olive, all the people brought to this town. You cannot pay for it. So why do you even bother meeting or appearing or even trying to represent a community that you have no funds for? You're in deficit 300 and something million, whatever it is. It's a huge deficit. And for each person in a tiny space in the East Boulder development with form-based code, I mean, this is Alpine Balsam, that this community cannot handle, the whole other town. It's not even part of Boulder, North Boulder. It's another city. Um, on a single corridor, Broadway. The transportation implications are huge, but the open space is huge. And it's counterintuitive to all of your objectives of trying to preserve space. The Hogan Pentecost area being developed as tennis courts because CU owns this town. Developing CU South, I don't know, 7,000 more students every year. It's just not feasible for you to be even bothering to operate because there's no way this can be paid for. And there's nothing in the budget. And what you need is to make the developers pay. That's what you need. Make the developers pay.
Thank you, Lynn.
And at this point, I'm not seeing any more hands.
Okay. We will go ahead and close public comment then. All right, we'll move into matters from the board. We have one consent agenda item in there about a revocable license for private prairie dog barrier usage of OSMP boundary fences. Unless someone would like to call it up, I'd like to open the floor for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I guess I'd just like to ask again. I think we talked about this a little last week. If we're going to do this as a consent agenda, why are we making motions that specifically reference the matter that we're voting on? Why don't we just have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I think it made sense when we had multiple ones to kind of like get in the practice of doing it. And I know that this the consent agenda is new to us. It was an idea that Brady had. And I know we wanted to kind of get used to it and like get the public used to that we were doing this. Is it okay if we go ahead and move to that to Harmon's recommendation?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Dan, I'm assuming that the city attorney reviewed the agenda. And so I'm happy to make the motion that's on the screen. But it would be great if we could get an answer as to why we're still specifically referring to matters on the consent agenda, and maybe just bring that up with the city attorney before the next meeting.
Yeah, I think so. Sam, I don't know if you have any information on it.
I don't have additional information. I was just going to say that we could check in before
Yeah.
the next meeting.
I'd recommend, yeah.
Yeah, so let's do it.
Okay.
Michelle, as my recommendation would be, I'll move the motion that's here,
Okay.
but I'd love to know if
Yeah,
we can change
just
that.
move to, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, my understanding is that we could, but let's just clarify that.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, I will second it then.
I haven't moved it, but
Oh, I thought you just did. Okay,
all
sorry,
right.
go ahead.
So, well, I got to read it into
Yeah,
the
that's right.
record, I guess. So, I moved the Open Space Board of Trustees recommend granting a template for for a revocable agreement with maintenance obligations in the form substantially similar to the attached for use in the Prairie Dog Barrier Cost Sharing Program. And now you'll second, but I've finished too fast.
Got a bit of cookie. I'll second that.
Next time I'll read slower.
All right, I'll call the roll. Sarah,
Yes.
Brady,
Yes.
and Harmon,
Yes,
and I also vote yes.
with the cookie in my mouth.
With a cookie in my mouth. It's a good one though.
Very good.
Okay, do we have
That was still lightning fast, even though we talked about process half the time. So just have to say that.
Yeah, thanks, Brady.
I miss Bethany though. Tell her, I know if you're watching. Okay, let's see. Do we have any questions on the written information item? And we just have one item in there, which is notes from our OSBT retreat. No, I'm not seeing any. All right, we're gonna hand this over to you, Dan, for matters from the department.
Great, thank you. We've got, well, 3 good items tonight. We're excited to be sharing all 3 with you. Tonight, we're going to start off with our Community Connections service area, focusing on Community Connections programming. And we have some guests as well that will be here to provide some comment towards that. But I'm going to first turn it over to Curry Rosado, our Education and Outreach Manager, who will get us started with this item.
Great. Thank you, Dan. And good evening, trustees. As Dan mentioned, my name is Curry Rosado, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Education and Outreach Manager with the City of Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks, and I have the privilege of supervising the education team. I have worked with, just a little bit about me, I've worked with the city for 21 years. Yes. And have been with Open Space for just about 8 years now. And joining me tonight, as Dan mentioned, really excited, and you're going to get to hear from everyone later, is Claudia Perez with Boulder Housing Partners and Geeta Carroll, thank you, with Boulder Valley School District. So excited and really appreciate y'all joining us this evening. Before I get started with our presentation tonight, I would like to acknowledge that these lands we call open space and mountain parks have been stewarded by Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. And as I deepen my understanding of history, I'd like to honor Indigenous peoples and their ancestors as we move forward in our education and our outreach work. So next slide, please. Thanks. So our presentation tonight will be focused on our Education and Outreach Service 6, which is building youth leaders and stewards. And we'll briefly touch base on, well, I'm excited to share with you our Education and Outreach team, who I have the privilege of being here to represent. We'll touch base on the alignment of this work with our master plan and strategic plan. We're going to dive just briefly into some research context, set the stage. We'll be talking and sharing more explicitly about OSMP's efforts with schools and families and our stewardship projects. We're going to also just spend a little bit of time in sharing about our citywide coordination in this work, our national expertise and support that we work with, and then we're really looking forward to some time for questions and conversation. So let's start with our education team. Thank you, Sam. The education team, you see 2 images here. Here on the left is an image of our education staff, with the exception of Ellen Steiner, who wasn't able to be at this meeting, where the picture is from. We are a team of amazing 3 program managers and education and outreach representatives. 3 education and outreach representatives. David Ford, Maggie Engelman, Kelly Kirk, Juanita Echeverry, myself, Lady Panita Flores. I'd just like to bring attention to Maggie Engelman, who's not with us tonight because she's on parental leave. She and her husband Jake welcomed a baby Jackson to the world, and she would be here because Maggie leads our youth education building youth leaders and stewards work. So it's my privilege to be here speaking on behalf of the team and especially Maggie. So next up. Of course, we always like to really remind ourselves of the guidance of our work, and that's with our master plan. And so tonight, I just want to draw your attention to Tier 2, bottom of the page, or bottom of the slide here, Community Connections, Education, and Inclusion, Strategy 3, which is connecting youth to nature. That is really what guides our work in our strategic plan of building youth leaders and stewards. Our work, as you can see here, there's a few X's on here, and I'm really proud to say that with intention, our work touches on other strategies that are checked here. Tonight, we're going to focus on connecting youth to nature. I'd like to, before we dive in, I'd like to invite you to do a brief activity with me. I am an educator, of course, so we're going to get involved. But in all seriousness, I want to invite all of you in the room, of course, our trustees and those of you online with us, to close your eyes or gently gaze down and think back to a childhood or young adult memory in the outdoors. Where are you? What do you see? What do you smell? How do you feel? Are you alone? Are you with a friend or a family member? So I'd like to invite you all to please open your eyes or gaze back up. And I hope some things came up for you that I'm curious, did you experience some experiences as a younger person that may have brought you to this position today and to this important work? And I want to invite you to hold on to that. And of course, we would love to reflect and have conversation, but due to the time tonight, I hope we can have a conversation about that at another time. I'd love to hear your experiences. So to set the context, as I said, next slide, thank you, Sam. To set the context, we're just going to touch base on the research. This is a hard slide to hear, and for some of us, for many of us, it might not be surprising, but I think it's important to note. And here's the fact. Kids are spending too much time on screens and not enough time in nature. And looking at the 2023 Healthy Kids Colorado survey data, we're just fresh looking at that really important information. Here's what we learned. Similar to kids nationwide, these are aligned with nationwide statistics, kids are spending too much time on screens and not enough time in nature. Specifically, 68.6% of Boulder Valley School District teens spend more than 3 hours a day on screens for purposes other than schoolwork. Only 3.8% of Boulder Valley School District middle school students went outdoors to spend time in nature at least once a week during the past 12 months. And only 5.2% of Boulder Valley School District high school students went outdoors to spend time in nature at least once a week during the past 12 months. Now, of course, that's based on survey respondents, and I would be delighted to have further conversations. But to set the context, that's hard news, and that's what we're talking about. I also have 2 teenagers. The good news is, next slide, the research is clear. Frequent experiences, playing and learning in nature, is the antidote. And at the lower part of this infographic from the Children in Nature Network, it shows us that there are numerous physical, mental, social benefits as a result of time in nature. And what I want you to take away from this infographic is this: children need nature, nature needs children, and frequent experiences, playing and learning in nature, and role models who care for nature help create nature champions. And our team, and I can imagine you do too, we recognize this. And so this really helps inform and guide our work, creating nature experiences for youth. So as we look at the next slide, our work connecting youth to the outdoors through building youth leaders and stewards, our work braids what we're doing here at OSMP, locally, regionally, and nationally, all of those efforts together for maximum impact. And in the following slides, I'm going to go through each component of this circle. We're going to spend the most time on what's happening here at OSMP in the city of Boulder. So working with our community partners here at OSMP, we offer a continuum of programming to build youth leaders and stewards, or connect youth to the outdoors. Our continuum includes schools and youth groups, families, defined as however you want to define a family, and stewardship or mentor and career opportunities. This year, I'm really proud to say, we reached 10,500 youth and their families through 219 programs and events on open space, at schools, in neighborhoods, and community spaces. Let's start with our work with schools. Here you see images of young people, Boulder Valley School District students, on open space field trips. And we believe that schools are hubs in our community. Working with schools is a conduit to reaching families and inspiring frequent time in nature. And partnering with schools is also a proven strategy for reaching our diverse community. That's why we've created an intentional continuum of preschool to 12th grade school programming that connects youth to nature through field trips, school assemblies, classroom programs. And whether it's the excitement of a new trail or positive feelings that young people had on open space, or something cool that they saw, it may have been scat, or that they learned on a field trip, we hear and we know that youth do take those experiences home. So we partner with Boulder Valley School District and local independent and homeschool organizations and school staff and faculty and students to co-create learning experiences on a variety of topics, from ecosystems and wildlife, insects, seasonal change, leave no trace, outdoor safety, you name it. We're excited to get kids outside learning. We believe that nature is our teacher, and we facilitate these experiences to build that nature connection and environmental literacy. So this year, just in our schools program, we reached 5,000 students and 20 Boulder Valley School District schools, 2 independent schools, and homeschools through 131 programs. So let's start, next slide, thank you, with our school assembly program with, you got it, Jeff and Paige, our amazing partners in the community. Since 2017, we've been partnering with Jeff and Paige to offer nature-based assemblies on school grounds and in schools. And in these experiences, Jeff and Paige, along with the outreach team, our outreach team, Ranger Paula, Coyote Bob, usually one or the other, they welcome students to open space lands through song, fostering excitement for the natural world. And we work with Jeff and Paige to align the content of the assemblies to the school standards and the curriculum that the students are exploring. So here's what one teacher said. "Thank you," all caps. "Students had so much fun and really enjoyed being outside, singing, dancing, and learning. We love the animal costumes and the songs as they connected to what we're doing in kindergarten." Thank you, Jeff and Paige and OSMP. So moving beyond, that's in our elementary schools. As we move along in the continuum in our second grade program, while this is not a program that Open Space and Mountain Parks education staff lead, we would be remiss without acknowledging our partnership with Thorn Nature Experience and Boulder Valley School District for the second grade wetlands field trip at Sombrero Marsh. So the field trip enhances second grade classroom science learning and fosters a sense of place through a day-long learning experience at Sombrero Marsh, where students discover the interconnections between animals, plants, water, land, and humans. Last year was the 20th year, and over 6,600 second grade students from 30 Boulder Valley School District schools experienced this day-long field trip on open space lands. Teacher feedbacks and evaluation is letting us know that students are in fact coming away from this field trip knowing about their local animals, their animal neighbors, how scientists conduct research, and students have an increased level of nature connection and comfort spending time in nature. OSMP also, moving on to third grade, thank you, offers a wildlife education program series in Boulder Valley School District third grade classrooms and on schoolyards. Are you picking up on a theme here? We try to get outside whenever we can. Our volunteer naturalists, amazing volunteer naturalists, created this program over 20 years ago, and it continues to be so popular and evolve. Each year reaching over 1,000 third grade students in 11 Boulder Valley School District elementary schools. So here you see some images again, that program outside, and I just couldn't not put our amazing volunteers on this slide. We recently had this picture on the right is an image of the volunteer naturalists that lead this wildlife education program. They participated in a 3.5-hour training last week so that they could be ready for the season. In this program, natural history is coupled with information about how to live with and react safely to wildlife in the event of an encounter with wildlife. And teachers may schedule all of 4 series: mountain lions, coyotes, bears, and snakes. Field trips, moving on. From third grade in our continuum, field trips to open space invite youth to learn in and about the natural world. And it's important. We know that children must first feel comfortable and safe in nature, and that's what these images are showing. From activities with the team to independent time, those are children out on Gun Barrel Hill on the right side of the slide, having sit spots and reflection time on a field trip. So let's take a deeper look at our 4th grade field trip. It's the Colorado Ecosystems Field Trip and Stewardship Extension Project. Over the past 4 years, we've been working with Boulder Valley School District 4th grade teachers, administrators, students, and community-based organizations, including Growing Up Boulder and Classrooms for Climate Action, to co-create a standards-based field trip experience of learning in the natural world. And that's what you're seeing here, different activities on those field trips. Through the field trip experience, students explore the ecosystem closest to their school, which oftentimes is closest to their home. At a nearby wetland or a forest or a prairie ecosystem, students focus on science practices like evidence-based explanations, a lot of observations, and learning about what makes that ecosystem special. The field trip really brings the local biomes to life and includes ways they can care for those special places. The field trip also is set up for a social studies connection around the power of youth and community engagement, and that's where the stewardship action piece comes in. Teachers may choose from a selected list of stewardship projects, and I'm excited to share one of those with you now. Next slide. For example, this slide includes images from a 2020-21 when we were developing this program, field trip experience at the Wood Brothers Project in Gun Barrel Hill area. This project, an OSMP, Growing Up Boulder, and Heatherwood Elementary collaboration, explored solutions with youth voice for nature-based learning on the Wood Brothers property, right adjacent to the school. And the project included classroom learning, so pre-field trips, field trips both on the Wood Brothers property and at Gun Barrel Hill, and 2 stewardship projects. And the stewardship projects included students sharing design solutions for outdoor learning on the Wood Brothers property across the street from their school, and artwork that's now, I hope you've seen it, on the Vesper Trail on the Gun Barrel Hill side. So students actively participating and communicating responsible recreation. Our team will be working on that project a little bit more next year. Here's an image of those signs. Next slide. I hope, if you haven't had a chance to go out there yet, I hope you get a chance to go out there. Moving on very briefly, and then I'm excited to turn it over to Geeta, to middle school and high school. We know that it is really challenging to get our middle school and high school youth out during the school day for all the reasons: large class sizes, challenging schedules, many barriers. I'm excited to share right now that we're piloting with our partners at NCAR this spring a middle school field trip in which students will have a nature-based learning experience on climate climate and fire outside, as well as a learning lab experience inside with our in-car collaborators. And we're really excited for this collaboration with NCAR, the teacher, our colleagues at NCAR, and our team. And we're exploring it as a pilot. And hopefully we can offer this program in the future for middle schools. We also are excited to give another nod to the Boulder Valley School District and a new course for high school students, Natural Careers Pathway at Sombrero Marsh. And these students on the right are part of the first program where students are receiving college credit, career experiences in the natural resources field. And our OSMP education and outreach staff are on the advisory committee. We're really grateful for that opportunity. Next slide, please. Great. We won't dive into the slide, it's pretty meaty, but I just wanted to share that evaluation is at the heart of what we do. We receive feedback and we feel like that's a gift. So we've been working on an evaluation plan and resources such as focus group, interviews, and surveys so that we can get information to ensure that our programs are relevant for our schools. So next slide, please, thank you. We want to say thank you so much to our partners at the Boulder Open Space Conservancy, the Connecting Youth with Nature initiative. We could not do this work without the Boulder Open Space Conservancy providing field trip, bus transportation, and helping to support educational materials for those field trips. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Geeta Carroll with Boulder Valley School District, who's here to share a little bit about the collaboration. Thanks, Geeta.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I will be brief, but just very happy to be here as an enthusiastic long-term partner of OSMP and all of the staff. And also Curry said I should mention that I'm a very proud parent of a junior ranger too. I'm not saying that just because she told me I am. The Boulder Valley School District has been committed to sustainability for decades, but in 2008 we created our first plan, really looking at how we're going to embed sustainability into operations and curriculum. We've updated that plan every 5 years, kind of based on progress and new direction, and OSMP has been a partner in the development and updates and implementation of that plan since the very beginning. Connecting kids to outdoors has also been a critical piece of that plan. Really huge piece of our current plan that we're in because it was created during the pandemic, so it's always been important, but getting kids outdoors and getting teachers the resources they need and the professional development they needed to feel really comfortable in that was amplified, as we all know, during that time, and now part of our sustainability plan and strong goals moving forward. So we can't do that work without partners like OSMP. So we value it and we understand why it's important, and it's because of partnerships that we're able to achieve the goals that we're able to set out. So we're deeply grateful for that work, and all of the programs that Curry just talked about are perfect examples of all the ways that we're able to do that. Another exciting development, Curry mentioned Heatherwood was recently established as our first eSTEAM school, environmental STEAM elementary school. So we're currently, it has that designation now as of about a month ago. We're working to define that. OSMP, we're going to continue the collaboration around the design of the Wood Brothers property, and OSMP is also helping with the project-based learning units that we're going to be part of that eSTEAM program. So that's another great example of the partnership. And then what you see here on the slide is the Seal of Climate Literacy, which is very exciting. So the state last spring passed a bill that this is now a recognition that graduating seniors can achieve, just like the Seal of Biliteracy and other kind of recognitions that you can achieve after your K-12 experience. So we jumped right on it to define what this looks like for BVSD. We actually have our first student potentially receiving this December as our first graduate, and many more students who've expressed interest. So we have all sorts of information on how we're defining that, but again, partners are a critical key piece to how we're able to achieve this for these students. So students will basically show their green trailway of commitment to climate literacy and engagement and sustainability over time from 6th to 12th grade. And that could be, for example, by being a junior ranger or being part of the programs that helped develop the Wood Brothers property at Heatherwood, or just getting outdoors with your family on a regular basis and being able to make that connection to climate literacy is how these students are going to be able to ultimately achieve this. So lots more to say about that. That's another really exciting thing that we're working on and a great way for this partnership. So Thank you very much. I'm here to answer any questions at the end too.
Great.
Yes.
Thanks, Geeta. We'll have time in the end. Great. So in continuing along with our youth, as we wrap up our schools and youth program, we wanted to share with you all this evening that our youth group programs include partnerships in the community. So as you look at this beautiful image of Flagstaff Summit Forest ecosystem, I'd like to share an example of our collaboration with a youth group. This June, staff naturalists partnered with Camp Indigo, a summer day camp run by trans community for trans, non-binary, and gender expansive youth. E&O staff led 2 forest bathing programs, introducing 51 teams to this wellness practice, sharing skills, building community, and incorporating representation through queering ecology. The kids were so excited for visibility in the outdoors and shared enriched conversations throughout the hikes. We're going to, the next couple of slides, dig into our family-based programming, which includes our nature discovery programs, storytime hikes, nature play dates, our nature discovery backpacks that are available for checkout at the Ranger Cottage, community events, and program series, such as the Little Explorers program. Yeah, oh, excuse me. On that slide, sorry, next slide. Thank you, Sam. This is a slide with some images of young people participating in our story time and our nature play programming. Next slide, please. Thank you. And here is an image on the left of the Meadow Music Series held at Chautauqua each year. And if you haven't yet had a chance to go to that, I would like to cordially invite you to, as well as quite a dark picture. But recently, from just this past weekend, we had a great participation in the December Parade of Lights. Again, opportunities for community members with groups to come out and connect open space and to each other. Next slide, please. Great. And now we're excited to share a partnership through a community partnership called Nature Kids Boulder. We are a partner in this collective impact project, working with community-based organizations to provide experiences for nature for historically underrepresented community members. Each month, Open Space and Mountain Parks offers Nature Kids Boulder Adventures on OSMP at a variety of trails, connecting with a variety of topics and with each other. This is an image here that you're looking at. It's one of my favorite, of education staff member Juanita Echeverry with young people, families from our Boulder Housing Partners community last summer on Flagstaff. Next slide, please. As part of this programming, we have for 3 years been engaged in the Little Explorers program. Now, as I mentioned, in its 3rd year, Little Explorers is a collaboration between Thorn Nature Experience and Boulder Housing Partners and Open Space Mountain Parks. This program engages our youngest community members and their families in nature connection experiences on open space. This fall, there were 45 people from 9 families who participated in the 6-week series. Each session is designed to provide a safe and supportive environment for hands-on learning, exploration in nature, enabling families to create lasting memories while deepening their relationship with the natural world. And it is my pleasure, with regards to the Little Explorers program, next slide, thank you, which received the Boulder Housing Partners Partnership Award this year. Thank you so much for that honor. I'm really excited to introduce you all to Claudia Perez, Family Resident Service Coordinator with Boulder Housing Partners. Claudia, we've worked with you for 7 years, and we are so grateful for your collaboration, and thank you for being here. And we have a prop to show y'all after Claudia shares a few words.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Claudia Perez, and I work with Boulder Housing Partners as a resident service coordinator. And I have the honor to be working with Open Space Mountains and Parks for the past 7 years with the program Bringing School Home. So part of our partnership during these past 7 years and for the recently 3 years past has been in the Little Explorers. We offer this opportunity to our families with kids under 6 years old, and it has been a pleasure to watch the kids growing and the families having happy faces, nature the kids, and take the nature as an opportunity of learning. We really appreciate a lot that Open Space Mountains and Park at Thorn use a balanced curriculum that can offer physical, social, and emotional aspect to create an enrichment learning environment reflected in the smile of the kids' faces and their parents' enthusiasm in each of the meetings that we host. So we really appreciate the commitment and the inclusive curriculum that promotes a strong sense of belonging and community in Boulder Housing Partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Oh, and we have this to show y'all just real briefly. Oh, and actually we'll go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. The image that's on the slide right now, thank you, Janelle, and thank you, Claudia. At the top of the slide is an image from our evaluation and focus group session. We do that in fun ways. And the young people and their parents and caregivers got together to create this beautiful piece. So we had to bring it with us. Thank you so much. Thank you. And for those of you online, we hope you're enjoying the beautiful image created by the Little Explorers families. So, and you can read these words here. It's been a wonderful program, and we're looking forward to continuing this and hope to evolve it into the future. Thank you, Claudia. As we next slide, please. Thank you. As we end this portion of OSMP's work, building youth leaders and stewards, we would be remiss without giving a nod to the stewardship work. You've heard over the years, and from many of our staff around our work, specifically in volunteer service learning with junior rangers and our work on the farms with teens. Here in this image, just wanted to share that within education and outreach during the junior ranger summers, our team is out with junior rangers participating in wellness or ecology, environmental education type projects. And on the right is Isabel, our first intern in partnership with Housing and Human Services. Again, this next summer, we'll have 2 internships, again, in collaboration with Housing and Human Services. So we're working hard in our continuum of preschool to 12th grade experiences to provide that full continuum leading to career opportunities. Thank you. Next slide. So just a few slides left, and then we're excited for our conversation tonight and your questions. We're going to spend just a moment looking at a really exciting citywide effort here at the City of Boulder, how we are working together with our city colleagues, connecting youth and families to nature. Next slide. And that looks like this. The Nature Everywhere Initiative, Boulder's Youth Nature Everywhere Initiative. This initiative, formerly known as the Boulder Youth Nature Initiative, connects youth to the outdoors from neighborhood spaces to wilderness places. This initiative includes a city staff team from 9 city departments and a growing number of community-based organizations working together to advance equitable access to nature for Boulder youth and their families. We're guided by our vision of a Boulder community where all youth feel connected to nature, connected to family and friends, hopeful about their collective future, and confident they can help nature thrive long into the future for the benefit of all. And some things that matter most in this initiative is equity, accessibility, and kinship with each other. Next slide. This project, again, in collaboration with Growing Up Boulder, and we always try to bring youth voice into the programs that we offer and experiences. And I wanted to share the slide tonight because we have been through city projects with Growing Up Boulder for many years, been hearing that youth want to be outside. They're wanting green and blue spaces. Next slide, please. Through the Nature Everywhere initiative, we won't spend too much time on this slide, but we do have a strategic vision, and it is based on age ranges. We're looking as a Nature Everywhere group at city parks and open spaces all across the city, designing spaces with youth voice and activating those spaces in relevant ways for that nature connection for all. Next slide, please. So we've talked about what we're doing in our department and some activities and an initiative at the city level. And we also are grateful for our work with national partners. The National League of Cities and Children Nature Networks, Nature Everywhere effort, is a key partner, as we've just described, and they're providing support and technical assistance as we do this work. They're also connecting us with an incredible network of Nature Everywhere communities across the nation. Would be excited to share more about that when there's time. And this spring, wait for it, we'll be launching Boulder's Nature Everywhere initiative, and excited to do that with our colleagues at the City of Boulder. And finally, as we close out our presentation, next slide, thank you, Sam. This braided effort, connecting youth to the outdoors, as we close out our time tonight and move into questions and conversation, I want us to remind ourselves, children need nature, nature needs children, and frequent experiences playing and learning in nature and role models who care for nature lead to nature champions. So that is why we do our work, offering this continuum of experiences for youth and families. And we hope this presentation sheds some light on how we do our work, a little bit about what it looks like. And as you've seen and heard here tonight, and again, thank you to my colleagues, we could not do this work alone. We're grateful for our partners, our community organizations, youth in our community that speak up, and also you. Thank you very much. And at this time, Claudia and Gita and I would be delighted to take any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Curry and Claudia and Gita, for coming here tonight. I think you have the best part of OSMP work right here. You do such amazing work, and you happen to be in front of a board of 4 people. John's not here tonight, but 4 of us, and Sarah's remote, all happen to have kids who have gone through this system. And I think a lot of them are around the same age. They're tweens to teens. So we definitely feel you when you talk about screen time and time outdoors and how nature needs kids and kids need nature, and you're all working so hard to do that. And I just want you to know how much this community needs that and how much we personally appreciate that. Um, I want to open it up for questions, but I'm just going to add one of my own questions up front. You talk about, and so we've had kids who my kids are moshers from Jeff and Paige at Chautauqua that get in there with all the toddlers, and they're almost 13 now. But we went there every week and rode our bike up there, and just a wonderful program. And because our kids go to BVSD schools and they have that privilege, it's amazing. I was just wondering if you could tell us what your outreach is to students outside of BVSD or outside of Boulder itself, because I know you do have quite a bit, and how you go about trying to reach other populations or less privileged populations as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Not that all of BVSD is that way. So,
yeah. Well, in our work, and to your point, to start with that, our work within BVSD, we've run our education field trip programs through the city's or in our department's racial equity instrument this year. And so we are, there is a process that really focuses on and looks at equity even within Boulder Valley School District. And to answer your question, which is an excellent question, we often work with we work with independent schools and homeschools. We're constantly searching for learning institutions in which this school field trip program would make sense, in assemblies. But we also work with community-based organizations. And one of our strategies, as we talked about in reaching Boulder's diverse community is through, for example, Boulder Housing Partners and Boulder Housing Partners communities through the Bringing School Home connects us with community members that I actually don't know the population of which goes to Boulder Valley School District. So that's one way. Other organizations that serve youth, Rocky Mountain Equality, Camp Indigo, are examples. We're always open to, that is our approach, is to learning about and connecting with organizations that serve youth, including youth that might not be represented in Boulder Valley School District, offering similar programs by co-creating with leaders in those organizations. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Do you also work with other school districts as well? Yeah. And how far out do you go?
Yeah, thank you. We do offer, we will welcome other school districts for these experiences, specifically the field trip programs. We have worked with St. Vrain Valley schools. It's just a lower number. Our partners and colleagues at Boulder County Parks and Open Space, we stay in touch with each other. So that's a school district that is primarily served by Boulder County Parks and Open Space. We do often have, it's just not many, but upon occasion, perhaps once or twice a year, we'll work with a school group from Denver. This year that did not happen, but it could. And also, I think what you might be hearing is that we are working to promote and outreach our programming within this community. However, we don't have a robust outreach program outside of the community. If someone calls, we were definitely happy to offer the program. So that's something we could look at.
And Curry, is it also not the case that we're describing a lot of the things in which we're strong partners or we're leaders in, but our land system itself also hosts a number of different field trips, school groups,
absolutely,
and in which we may not be the leaders of, but the land system itself is welcoming groups that, you know, is we're not planning on or planning for.
Thank you, Dan. For example, we might be on a field trip at Chautauqua, and this has happened, and a bus comes up and you're leading a field trip and thinking, I really want to know what that school is. So we work with our permit team at Open Space and hope to continue to deepen those collaborations so we can know who's coming and how might we ensure that there's feeling of belonging for groups that don't necessarily come organized through us.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love that because obviously we have resources to share with other communities and let them know that that's free, right? Free to them. Great, thank you. Who wants to go next? Brady?
Michelle, I thought that was a good comment and question, so I appreciate that. Curry, it is so clear that you are the right person for this job with your energy and enthusiasm.
Thanks.
It just comes through in who you are and how you presented, so thank you for that.
She's been doing it since she was 4, by the way, if you're
okay.
keeping track of the math, 21 years.
So this may seem like a non sequitur, but often this is the time when I talk to my daughter. She's stationed at Fort Bragg. She recently enlisted in the Army, and she tried to call me, and I said, I'm at a meeting. And so I sent her the link, and she's actually been watching your presentation. And she says that there's, a lot of these programs in our community here in Boulder, and they're valuable in a way that you don't really see until you leave the Boulder community outside of Colorado and outside of the rest of the world. She feels like a standalone in her knowledge of the outdoors and how to interact with nature. It's shown up in her choice to enter the Army, making long ruck marches, feeling nostalgic from the hikes back home, feeling comfortable with maps, having seen them and been around them for years, and finding comfort in field exercises due to the many nights that she spent camping. Now, some of that was on an open space and some of that was in other surrounding regions. But she said, kids can be hard to please, but the work y'all are doing is incredibly impactful in helping create adults who understand our world in all corners of the world. So that's a little message of encouragement from Fort Bragg.
Sharing.
Yeah.
Good job, Dad.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't take, they just kind of come out the way they're going to be
Thank
sometimes.
you for sharing.
But and my last question is, and we don't have to go over it right now, but I'm curious about our numbers. You mentioned some numbers like 5,000 students and this and that, and I couldn't really track it all. Do we have goals and trend lines over time? Presumably you're tracking that. I love the anecdotal stuff. I also like to see some harder data and trend lines over time. And so, again, I don't want to make this a make work project, but I'm curious to know where we've been, where we are, where we want to go. And I also think, tracking who those people are, and are they people that are from outside the community. And it's the last comment. It's one thing to say that they're welcome on our lands. It's another thing to go and try to find them and invite them in. It's a very different activity. I'm not saying that's what you need to be doing, but I'm just curious about that. And at some point in the future, I'd love to see some of that information.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I look forward to next steps in exploring that. And the short answer is that yes, we have a lot of data that I spared from the slides, and it does inform. Variety of sets of data inform, and those trends are really important to us. So thanks for bringing it up, and love to continue that conversation.
So thanks. That was a great presentation. And my second grader came home this year from Sombrero March talking about egrets and turtles, and she was pretty excited. So thanks for that. Try to get them out in nature as much as I can. I like your tagline, intrigued by it, about children need nature, nature needs children. And I'd love to just hear from your perspective, or all three of your perspectives, what the second piece, that nature needs children, means to you.
Thank you. It's a great question. I have been talking a lot tonight. I'm not avoiding the question, but I'm wondering if anyone wants to speak, but I'm happy to jump in. Nature needs children. It might be more appropriate for me to jump in. Yeah, I was about to say. Nature needs children because nature needs people to care for it and to have a relationship with it.
Yeah, I think that's how you create stewards of the outdoors and nature, and kids who care by connecting with them. And so I agree, that's cyclical. Yes.
But to me, it speaks like when we are in nature, we discover that something is bigger than us, and we find the happiness and the calm and the peace of the nature. We can observe the beauty of everything and the nothing at the same time. And I think it's very important when the children discover that magic at a young age, that they want to take care of the nature, grow up in the nature, and take care of the Mother Earth. I think it's everything very important.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Sarah, would you like a chance to speak?
Sure.
I know this is a topic you care a lot about.
It really is. And I have just been smiling here, and am really grateful for the work that you do. I do have two children. I have a daughter who is now 20, and she's a senior at UC Berkeley. She's invented a sunscreen that feeds the coral reefs while they swim. And I am positive that growing up in Boulder and all of the experiences that she went through in these programs has absolutely informed her in her choice, in her studies, and in her career path. And then I have a 12-year-old in 7th grade at Summit Middle, and you might have seen him coming back and forth here behind me on the screen. But I accompany the school field trips whenever possible through these experiences. And what I've enjoyed here is really getting the chance to see and understand in a focused way how many times my kids have actually gone through these programs. When you're a parent and you're just sort of in the, what's the next field trip and where are we going? I kind of took for granted how many of the experiences they've had have actually come through you all. So just an enormous thank you. This is a standout in our community. I'm so proud of it, and certainly espouse the view that nature needs us as much as we need it. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate your time, and this is just such a special program, so please keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
for your
thank you all
support.
for coming. We really
Thanks.
appreciate it. All right, well, we are going to turn our focus into climate action. And if for those of you who have been on the board for a number of years, you know that this is a topic that we have been bringing you along with as we have been developing more of a strategic approach to what that means, what climate action means. It was certainly called out in our master plan, which I'm sure Alicia and Brian will allude to. But we have had study sessions with this focus with you all. We've had touches throughout the year. And we're really, really pleased to bring you a culmination of a lot of these work over the past few years that's resulted into a climate action plan for our department and our department staff. So we could get our hands around what does it mean to have climate action in a strategic way. So super excited that we've reached this milestone, and Brian Aneker and Alicia Alexander are here. They've been our champions in bringing this effort forward, and super glad to have them present to you our climate action plan.
Great. Thank you, Dan, and good evening, trustees. Well, our story tonight begins in 2019 with the publication of our master plan. During that process, we heard loud and clear from our community, from our advisory board, from city council, from staff, that it was time to make some statements about climate action. And we did so via the Ecosystem Health and Resilience Focus Area, EHR. Both in terms of an outcome statement, EHR-C, a Tier 1 Master Plan Strategy, EHR-3, and Tier 3 Master Plan Strategy, EHR-9. So that set the stage for what turned out to be several years of collaboration to bring us to where we are tonight, to recognize a major milestone, which is to produce yet another plan, but this one is really an implementation plan. And we've also, while we've been planning, doing lots of cool pilot projects, which we'll give you an idea about as we go. So we talked to you last year in December, and I'm just gonna cover the hits really quick about what we said last time. We took a look at our work plan. We know we're in the business of land conservation, and shouldn't what we're doing day in and day out sort of count as climate action? And indeed, when we coded our projects as having direct or indirect connections to climate, we can say, you know, somewhere around 40 to 60% of our projects connect to climate. So acquiring land in the first place, preventing its conversion, keeping that land healthy, preventing its degradation. Things like that should be counted as climate action. But we knew there was a lot more that can be done on top of that strong foundation. And we really went to our staff and our partners, especially climate initiatives in the city of Boulder. The county has a group called OSCAR, Office of Sustainability, Climate and Resilience, and asked them, what are your best ideas? And we're taking all information, and we started writing those down. We also created a new work group called Science and Climate Resilience to help accelerate this work and really assign some responsibility for bringing integration. And that's myself and Alicia, Paul Dennison, who we've heard from on wildfire resilience, Ann Lesberg on science integration. And we've now added the wildfire resilience coordinator, who Giles from the community alluded to earlier. So our group is really trying to focus on these interrelated topics. And then we quickly recognized we had some major gaps around how much carbon do we have? How much do we emit every year? So we hired some consultants, summarize a couple of years of work in one slide here. This is a story map that's public facing called OSMP's Climate Resilience. The two takeaways are that every ton matters and we need to take care of what we have. Every ton matters. We looked at our operations, and if we define it narrowly, we emit around 3,600 or so metric tons of CO2 every year as a department. That's our fleet and our building, our construction projects, things like that. Here's an example of an electric vehicle representing one of the major changes we're making to try to bring that number down. I put a few benchmarks there because the numbers are otherwise kind of meaningless. The Boulder community writ large emits around 1.5 million metric tons. So on the one hand, 3.6 thousand seems like a drop in the bucket. Another metric or comparison here is that an average household, including ours, is probably 1 to 2 metric tons per month, or 12 to 15 per year. And then a round trip flight, LA to New York, is like 1 or 2 metric tons. So what we learned in our study was we have an appreciable amount of emissions, and that we can actually assign a price tag to every ton that goes into the atmosphere. $150 minimum, up to $500 per ton if you include the social costs and the damages that are brought. So if you multiply that through, you're talking about millions of dollars of damages going out into the atmosphere every year from our operations alone. So we want to take care of that problem and try to minimize every ton that we can. This other thing is, how much carbon do we have in our vegetation and our soils? Lots of ways to do that, but we're now just kind of earmarking that as around 3 million metric tons, if not more. So one comparison there is that the city as a community goes through all of the carbon stored in our land in about 2 years. So we have a big account or savings bank of carbon, but it isn't massive. And our consultants were also pretty pessimistic about growing that savings bank in an appreciable way. We might get a fraction of a percent or maybe 1% on top of what we have. And instead really warned us about even maintaining it in the face of some major natural disasters like fire, flood, and drought. With those events comes major chances to lose some of the stored carbon. And for example, a 100-acre wildfire would emit around 4,000 metric tons. And so you could lose 4,000 tons in a day. So taking care of what we have means stewarding that land to keep those ecosystems healthy and get that co-benefit of stored carbon. We took all those consultant ideas, all staff's ideas, put them in one big list, started referring to those as climate solutions. That list reached almost 100 items long. This year we went into prioritization where we started to lump and clump and filter, sort, and force rank them and draw a line. And we drew a line right around 19 top priority solutions, organized those into 3 climate plan objectives. And that's what you've got in your handout there, and really represents the backbone of this plan, which we very plainly titled the City of Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks Climate Plan 2024 to 2030, a 6-year plan really designed as a staff tool to help guide operations for the next 6 years. Happy to share the backbone of the plan with you here tonight. And then that big block of text at the bottom is a long list of staff and partner acknowledgements, just to say that we're here to represent this plan, but we had a lot of partnership and hands in bringing it together for you here tonight. So here's your handout, front page. It's in the memo, I believe figures 2 and 3, where are the front and back of your poster or handout. The top says climate plan objectives. Right under that is our motto, immediate action, lasting impact. We've spent several years with this engagement and doing studies, and now we're ready to move into action. We're looking for those things that are within policy and low-hanging fruit that are going to give us a lasting impact at the same time. Of course, in parallel, we'll do some of the harder, longer-term things, but this is our main motto to guide our selection of actions going forward. These are our 3 objectives: increasing the climate resilience of our natural and working lands, taking care of our emissions, and then fostering climate awareness. At the bottom, we've repeated those 2 takeaways from our consultant studies: taking care of what we have, that stored carbon in land, and that every ton matters. Backside is the same objectives, just cast horizontal left to right. I'm just going to bring those in as a pile one at a time. The first objective is ranked number 1, and accordingly it has the most climate solutions listed under them. I'm going to give you a couple examples using real projects, and I'm not going to read these to you. What I do want to point out is I've added a few icons on top of this to make a couple of connections for you. First is that fire icon. You can see about 5 of these climate solutions have a connection to wildfire resilience. And that means that these two topics are interrelated. We know with drying and warming, we're getting more intense and severe wildfires. With more wildfires, we're releasing more carbon into the atmosphere, further destabilizing local climate, and vice versa. If we can do things that help us reduce wildfire risk and increase carbon benefits, those would be co-benefit opportunities. And Alicia, as the implementer of this plan, and with George and Paul and myself working on the wildfire plan, we're in constant contact to bring these things together. The second kind of icon is that light bulb. 8 of these 9 don't have that light bulb. That means that these are ongoing projects. And what the climate plan is doing is saying, can we do these faster? Can we do these further? Can we do them better? These aren't revolutions, these are evolutions. With a little more staff input and a little more financial input, where can we tweak these to make them even better? The light bulbs, on the other hand, do represent some new thinking. Post-fire reforestation, we're looking at our neighbors, especially at the Calwood fire. Boulder County Parks and Open Space had to do a lot of emergency almost type of planning in terms of what are we going to do with these landscapes to stabilize them, and then what are we going to do about bringing trees back. So we just want to do some of that thinking up front so that we're ready to go if and when those kind of stand replacing fires come to open space lands. Next pile comes in objective 2, just 5 solutions there, a few more light bulbs and 1 connection to wildfire. And then in objective 3, 5 solutions, 3 light bulbs. One last thing I want to say about these light bulbs is put all together, it does represent, 7 new ideas, and how are we going to pile that on top of staff's busy work plans? Well, I did mention this SCR work group is here to help. And in fact, we are sort of taking responsibility and leadership for a lot of these light bulb projects to make sure we're not overburdening staff with busy schedules already. Okay, so now I'm just going to give you a couple examples per climate plan objective just to make this a little more real. Okay, first, climate resilient agricultural land was one of our top climate plan solutions. We know from our consultants the vast majority of our carbon storage is in soils, 2 million metric tons there. We also know that soil carbon is vulnerable to loss for various reasons. And we had a consultant estimate that from a single 100-acre piece of land, you could lose up to 30 metric tons in a day in a high windstorm. Showing a photograph, I think Lauren Kolb took this from an airplane on March 31 at a dust storm in Boulder. So Eric Fairley, our agricultural senior program manager in Heather Swanson's service area, has a project to go to work on degraded agricultural lands using multiple tactics to help restore them and stabilize that soil. This project here we're looking at is in the presence of prairie dog occupation, adding some brush piles to the landscape. So this landscape has been seeded to try to bring the living cover back, and the brush piles then protect those baby germinating plants from herbivory from prairie dogs. And what we're working with Eric on is whether we can scale this technique, if we can confirm that it's working, and we can add some measurements, including dust collectors, which I'm showing here. What is the rate of soil loss from this property? Are these piles doing their job to reduce that rate of soil loss? We're also adding some microclimate instruments there to see if we're unintentionally heating or cooling the soil and changing soil moisture dynamics. A second example is climate ready riparian areas. We showed you this last December. I'll just bring it up again. Z-dike structures and check dams, working with Kat McIntyre and wildland restoration volunteers in Gregory Canyon, installed a couple different flavors of these. These are just low-tech structures that you put in drainages, and what they're trying to do is intercept water during high flow events, spread that water, slow that water, capture sediment, build that sediment up behind the dams, effectively wetting that landscape, making it more verdant, green, and getting us a bunch of co-benefits around water storage, carbon storage, native plant diversity, etc. Okay, so our climate plan objective 2, I've got a project that hits 3 different solutions. I mentioned from our operations perspective, over 3,000 tons per year. Josh Maheda Jones, working with Ben Mayer in our fleet and facilities work group, and Jeff Haley's service area, have taken a project at Cherryville campus to electrify it, really looking at it as a holistic project where we've got a grant from the Colorado Energy Office to augment some OSMP operational and CIP funding to do things like convert from gas-powered furnace to an electric heat pump, to upgrade the site's electrical service entirely to support level 1, 2, and 3 EV chargers so we can bring more Ford Lightnings in for ranger use and other staff use. We have a solar array in the backyard there. After Marshall Fire, we realized that was at a major risk. Some of the regional solar arrays got burned down. So we brought in some grazing using these sheep to reduce the wildfire risk and protect that investment. This is a big one. We talked to you at the retreat about a little bit, reducing emissions from visitor travel. 15,000 metric tons per year based on 32 million vehicle miles traveled by our visitors to and from open space access points. If we want to go to work on reducing this number, these are the inputs that derive that number. So we would need to reduce the number of visits, or reduce the distance traveled, or change the arrival mode away from vehicles towards arrival by bicycle or foot, change the vehicle type from diesel to gas to electric, for example, or increase the occupancy rate from single occupancy to something like carpooling. Of course, this is almost completely parallel to strategy 7, which is asking the city to take a holistic look at this to reduce vehicle miles traveled, as well as GHG. Strategy 6 also talks about a 15-minute neighborhood, which is trying to reduce those trip lengths and get what you need closer to home. And then 7C really specifically speaking to the open space component of trail connections and connecting that with multimodal options. We did actually have our consultants start to think about potential strategies for reducing emissions. And we really wanted them to focus on things that were largely within our control, that were within existing policy. And they came up with very familiar things like increasing bike parking, adding more B-cycle stations, encouraging more shuttles and shuttle use, increasing carpool space, cameras at trailheads for like parking feeds to reduce moving from trailhead to trailhead to find a spot to reduce idle times, increasing incentives for ride shares. And really what they found was there wasn't a clear silver bullet strategy that was going to work to cut this number down. Instead recommended a multi-tactic or multifaceted approach. And then at our retreat, we heard clearly from the board that part of what needs to happen here is going to require like a human behavioral change, which you might render through education and outreach campaigns or events, kind of building on the successful model of Bike to Work Day. Could we try something like Bike to Hike Day, just to get the community activated and talking to one another and taking their own initiative to change their transportation modes. We also heard the importance of connecting with local business, local organizations, and other city and county departments, and not go about this alone. And of course, equity, which is a lens throughout our plan and the city operations in general. But in this case, is to really think about the costs and benefits of any initiative we would bring, and really thinking about transit access options for underserved communities. Okay, so our last climate plan objective is climate awareness, participation, and equity. I'm going to pick on greener projects. So for the North Sky project, we worked with Greg Seablum, our trail project manager, and Jeff Haley's service area. As a very early look at this, we are looking at the North Sky project and looking at the bridges in particular, and we just asked Greg, you know, what would it take to think about different materials choices? We knew from our consultants that steel has one of the highest carbon footprints of anything. We also know it's one of the longest lasting materials you could possibly use. So it wasn't clear, like, don't use steel, but could you take a look at that and ask your consultants to go to work? And I think the feedback we had was there weren't a lot of great alternatives. The consultants and Greg and ourselves just didn't really know how to go about giving reasonable alternatives for these materials. And things like green concrete, for example, for the footing, they just weren't mature enough. You couldn't just go buy it, and it was just going to create a lot of bottlenecks and barriers. So we were taking those lessons learned and moving it into this concept of greener projects, where our work group can start to think about what are those major hurdles that staff need to green their projects. Do we need a carbon calculator to help identify the carbon footprint? Do we need a BMP to talk about how to come up with different alternatives with different carbon footprints, and then compare those with the financial costs or the staff costs, and how do you weigh those in terms of checks and balances? Or do we need a policy that just simply says we must reduce our carbon footprint, and here's how we're going to embed it into our projects? Are we running low on time? Okay. So that's greener projects. A lot of TBD there, but we're excited about it and think it can have a big impact. Lastly, youth climate leaders. Over the last 4 years, we've had, working with junior rangers, a climate crew, and we've focused them on microclimate. And the learning objectives here is to really think about global warming and what that means in the context of our backyard, specifically thinking about the diversity of climate that you can find around open space. And then the ultimate objective there is a sense of this microclimatic diversity that we have actually represents what you can call a refugia for people, for plants and animals. They actually don't have to travel far on open space land to track their desired habitat, as opposed to if you're in the middle of Nebraska or the middle of Kansas, there's really not many places you can go to cool down or to warm up. On the other hand, at open space, some of these data points you see on the table represent temperature contrast you can find across the land at one point in time. So from sun to shade, 20 degrees Fahrenheit. From dry to wet habitats, 30 degrees Fahrenheit at the same time. From a thinned forest stand to an unthinned forest stand, 55 degrees temperature difference. And we know these numbers now because junior rangers have put these microclimate loggers out over all kinds of contrasting environments over time. And they get really excited about that. And we ask them to write a report and give a presentation and really connect it back to not only gee whiz, is that interesting, but what are we going to do about it? So zooming out, here's our backbone for the plan. 3 plan objectives, 19 climate plan solutions. The red boxes are the handful that I illustrated with some examples here tonight. And I'm going to turn it to Alicia now to talk to you about implementation.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, and I don't thank you. I only have 2 slides, so we're almost there. Thank you. Alicia Alexander. And as you see up on the screen, I'm going to be speaking to our implementation approach that's already underway. And one of the key things is filling the role of the climate plan implementation coordinator, which, as we've said and in the memo, is myself, but obviously with huge support from the SCR, the Science and Climate Resiliency Work Group, including Brian. And so with our approach, we've kind of have 5 facets to it that we want to be really deliberate about and focus on. Keep coming back to these, use these as buckets, so on and so forth. So the first one being really leaning in and continuing our strong engagement that we've already been doing, as Brian mentioned, over the last couple of years, is consulting and collaborating with our experts that we already have in the department, and helping to coordinate across work groups, aligning efforts and focus for the next 6 years is really important. And this will allow us to remain impactful, adaptable, as well as get some results-driven, changes with all the stuff that lots of folks are juggling, including ourselves. And then with the resources piece of it and coordinating not only the staff time, but the financial piece of it, we're going to be, of course, looking into creative external funding sources, including the Climate Tax Fund, but also other grants. But as Brian mentioned, there's 19 solutions, but after already speaking with our staff and the staff that are going to be managing the projects that are related to these 19 solutions, we found that there was actually 56, if you will, child projects that connect directly to these 19 solutions. And so Brian there just gave us 6, more or less, an example of 6 of them, and there's still 50 others that support these 19 solutions
in various ways. So it's not one-to-one. So very intricate, but it actually turns out that we have 12 distinct staff that are going to be in charge of project managing those 56 projects. And so being kind of the point person for that, lifting them up is really important. And we'll talk more about that in the tools section. But one thing there at the bottom, you'll see it's 150,000 to 300,000 from our why am I blanking on the term? Capital Improvement Program. Thank you. I always wanted to say climate. Capital Improvement Program. So we've been allotting this much for the last 2 years, and we plan to use it to do this per year to supplement the great work that staff are already doing. And this is going to allow us, as we've already done, earmark, say for 2025, some of the priority projects that need just a little bit more oomph moving forward in 2025. For example, Eric Fairley's project and so on and so forth. So exciting stuff happening already. For the project management support tools, that's the idea that we're going to either find or create the tools that we can to help those project managers, mainly also just to help with reducing barriers as they move forward in this, with everything else that they're juggling and so on and so forth. We've highlighted the great work they're doing and we've illuminated it. And so, yeah, they're excited. The feedback was they're excited and thankful. And yes, they're open, obviously, to a lot of support and help. Moving on is the reports, of course. We want to focus on transparency and accountability. So we are committed to giving periodic updates of, tracking successes, lessons learned, milestones, and just making sure that we're keeping you along in this journey and keeping you all informed, that you have chances for input, as well as the community too, moving forward. Super important. And then the learning piece was a really deliberate arm of this in the sense that we need to adapt as we learn more in this ever changing knowledge of climate, right? Climate change, so being able to lean into the and leverage the connections and partnerships we already have with peer agencies as well as the research community is amazing. And so the plan is to really intentionally synthesize and distill that down into meaningful ways and bring that back to our department year over year and share that with our staff. And then the other way to really show that we are advancing our efforts is, as we mentioned in the memo and as Brian mentioned, I will be working very closely with the new wildfire and climate resilience program manager who is overseeing the implementation of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And this allows us to really, share our knowledge and align our priorities and unify our strategies, and always keeping in mind that interconnectedness between wildfire risks and climate change. And then, so as you can see on the screen here, wildfire and climate resilience implementation, we are planning to make this this will be an OSMP strategic priority, one of the few, say for this for 2025. And this synergy really ensures that both areas receive the focused attention and that they each need, as well as resources are going to hopefully be maximized as much as to that is able to be done. And so that, again, we can address that interconnectedness and the challenges posed by both wildfire and risk, and how there's that cycle of potentially amplifying each other. More on the OSMP strategic priorities as well as key initiatives will be coming to you all in the January OSBT meeting. So more to say on that later.
Okay, so we've got a few prompting questions. We'd like to open it up for your feedback, either following along the lines of these three or whatever direction you want to take it.
Anybody like to go first? Harmon, go ahead.
So first of all, Alicia and Brian, thank you very much for not only a great presentation, but the packet materials were incredible. And I read them with interest, and I think that we're in a real leadership position here. I don't know what everybody else in the world is doing, But I got a good friend back in Tahoe who sits on some boards with Desolation Wilderness and Alpine Watershed Group, and I started talking to him about some of the things that were in the consultant report that you helped with, and they're going for grants to do things like forest thinning projects, and they have no idea what any of this stuff is worth. And I'm not bagging on them for not knowing. It's just this is pretty cutting edge stuff from what I can tell. And so to be able to say, look, 100-acre fire, is gonna put out 400 metric ton equivalents of CO2, and each one of those is going to be worth $200 to $500 in damage. You can say, well, a 100-acre fire is going to cost you, $2 million or $1 million. So if we can get a grant to thin a forest to save $1 million or $2 million, and it's $75,000 to get some guys out there with some chainsaws, and um, suddenly starts looking cheap. And being able to quantify this is just, it's really special. And I just wanted to, remind people listening, you know, that this staff's doing an amazing job, and we're learning things that not everybody knows. And it's I sent him the packet. He's probably going to use some of he'll cite to your reports if he makes a presentation to the Alpine Watershed Group and say, look what they're doing in Boulder. We've got a whole new set of things that we can bring out when making our grant proposals. So I gave him an example. I said, I went hiking after the NCAR fire, and I could see the fire line was right where the treatment took place. And that gave the fire crews a foothold that they could hold that line. And what was that, 3.5 acres in the end, was that fire? Am I right? It was bigger than that? How much bigger? Do you guys remember a number? But compared to what it could have been, right? I mean, that could have gotten out of control and been huge. And when you can quantify that and say whatever we spent on that thinning project resulted in some ungodly amount of savings, right? When 100 acres is a $500,000 problem, that's pretty great. Okay, so that's my comment. I guess I'll follow your script and ask a question. For question number one, I'd want to hear more about the one you didn't touch on in emissions reduction, the sustainable use of thinned woody material. And I often think that we're putting when we cut down trees and do thinning projects, we're just emitting that carbon slowly as those wood piles decompose. And as long as Excel is still only 35% renewable in their portfolio, if we could have a biomass plant, we could offset some of those carbon emissions with carbon that's going to end up in the environment anyway, and we could scrub it, on its way out the smokestack of the bioplant. So, do we have any thoughts around partnering with Excel to provide raw materials for biomass or anything like that?
We're laughing because we made a slide to represent a collaboration project. Alicia's managing. So do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'll turn mine on. Yeah, so as you can see up on the screen, there's actually a consultant-specific, very collaborative. You can see up in the upper right-hand corner, we've got the county, city, other city departments, the Forest Service, other watershed agencies that are working with a consultant to make sure that not only just what's known, but also what is going to be market available in the next 5 to 10 years based off of our outputs as well, and also what's the end product, right? And the co-benefits of not only the end product, but also just understanding a more energy efficient, more impactful, feasible options for this biomass waste. So we're super excited about it. You can see, I didn't put them all there. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got about 12 pathways that they're analyzing, and they're going to give us a whole report on pros, cons, top 3, so on and so forth, best collaboration. They're doing a whole study pilot for us specifically for Boulder, which is awesome. And so, yeah, there's some really interesting ones there. I think we have 8 listed out of the potential 12. And then, yes, working with other groups, for example, like you said, Excel, so on and so forth. Yes, we're very, very in it right now. Anything you want to add?
I was just going to point out the photos, the bottom left, I think that's you on the left, looking at is that a mobile biochar unit?
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of interesting pilots that are happening beyond just having a consultant do research. Top right is Zach Hedstrom, who's inoculating wood chips that are left in the forest and checking on the decomposition rates in situ. So those are 2 that we're testing out in various places with different partners. So yeah, we're working on it. And in a year, knowing that you're interested in that, we'll probably have a lot more to say.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I dream about things like, you've got a bio plant, it's making energy. You've got a bunch of trucks that are charging overnight. You got all the electric chainsaws charging at the bio plant overnight. The crews go out in the electric trucks. They, use the electric chainsaws and stuff to take down the material. They load the trucks. They all ride back down to the plant, unload the trucks, put the trucks and the chainsaws back on the charger that the biomass plant is powering up. And, it's like all renewable. And we have all that technology like now. My Amazon truck is electric. It's a big box truck the Rivian guys are making. All the power tool companies make electric chainsaws. Could be fun.
Go ahead, Brady.
And meanwhile, the planet burns down. I mean, I think one thing that just strikes me is obviously the resilience work in our community makes a lot of sense. Carbon makes sense on a global perspective, and if our ship is tight, but the rest of the world's isn't, I mean, it's a nice thing to do. I guess from that perspective, a question I have is, are we in any way playing in the carbon markets? What if it was the case that a wealthy community like us that apparently doesn't have a whole lot of restoration and capture opportunities within our limits would be much better served to make investments in other parts of the country, or potentially even the world, where restoration projects could truly sequester carbon more or less permanently. And so I struggle sometimes with these thoughts about like, well, okay, if we have everything works really well in our community, we've got the money to realize Harmon's vision, and yet the surrounding communities aren't participating. Are we sure that we're using our resources in the smartest way from a global perspective, not just our local perspective? And so that's a wide-ranging thought and comment, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So first off, time and resource permitting in the next, 6 years, so through 2030, we will continue, besides we started with 20, of course, because that's a round number, 2 got absorbed together. So of the 19 remaining, remember we said there was potentially over 100 that got ranked and filed and that are feasible. And yes, specifically what you're talking to is in there as a potential. And I think it got ranked pretty high as far as impact and feasibility and so on and so forth.
And what was that exactly?
Oh, just the carbon accounting and carbon direct, and understanding like, could we put our money elsewhere to support a bigger picture, other regions and products and communities. So yes, and I'll let you take over as to why maybe that got ranked lower and why didn't make it to the top 19 currently.
Yeah, I think as we talked about last year, the carbon, the state's not really there. Colorado isn't where California is. We're a little bit wait and see. I think when we did our own estimates of carbon, we realized, like, I presented these numbers to you as they were fact, but if you put the error bars on them, there's a lot of uncertainty there. And the durability of these investments you might make off-site, they're really hard to trust, and the certification programs are not quite mature. And we just don't have a lot of control over any of that. These other 19s were things that kind of align nicely with our motto. And the last thing I would say is it would be nice to have climate initiatives here, our sister department, and we kind of look to them for a little more of that leadership and guidance. and they're the ones that are traveling to South America to attend, the climate conference and hobnob with global leaders and try to bring some of those lessons back and forth. And I think if they give us the green light to enter into that conversation in a more formal way, we'll happily do so. But the feeling that I was getting is the readiness isn't quite there.
But it's on our radar.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It just, the curiosity I have is like, okay, when we're talking about avoided carbon, for example, with different bridge materials, like the example in North Sky, if we made a choice there, what was the cost per avoided metric ton that we made there? And is there some kind of metric that we can be ranking our activities? Because some of these are expensive and they're local, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing them, but then, well, what's the cost of carbon on the open market? $50. So we can kind of rank how we're doing and how it fits in a global context. That's really the only thing that I'm taking away in terms of not even criticism, just some constructive thought, because I think that's one of the things, like, I think it's great when Boulder's sometimes we are a shining city on the hill. We can be an example to others. And sometimes I think we feel great because our ship is tight. And like I said, the rest of the world isn't doing as well. And so are there more creative ways that we can share our abundance and our ability to lead in a more global context? So anyway, thank you for listening.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I think that's actually a nice segue to what I was, I guess, how I wanted to use my time here. I really like that objective one when you were showing the slide about agriculture, and could you go back to that? So for reference, can we look at that? I'm really interested in the intersection there between climate resilience, fire resilience, climate, and agriculture. I think you were showing there was so much in here. Yeah, climate resilient agricultural land. Thank you. That was the term. I was actually approached recently by Catherine Hunzinger, who is the founder, she's been the owner of Wish Garden Herbs, which is now in the US, the largest herbal blend for herbal formulator in the United States. So she's in most of the grocery stores in the sort of natural products area if you're looking for a remedy to help with your allergies or your stress or your hormones. And she's built quite a successful company, kind of alongside some of the more well-known rock stars in the community, Celestial Seasonings, Horizon Dairy, some of the other sort of founding companies. She is one of the founders that has been long time here in the community. And she's now working on something called the Herbiculture Project, where she's identified as she sources herb crops from all over the world to put into her blends. She's identified that these are cash crops and that farmers can make quite a bit more by growing these herbs and selling these herbs. And she's on a mission to bring these herbs home, so to speak, to have them grown locally. And she's really interested in creating doing some feasibility studies right here in Boulder. And I just love this idea of collaboration between industry and agriculture that can serve human health and environmental health. And kind of to your point, Brady, I mean, when is it that what we're doing is just only happening here and we're being kind of isolationist? A project like this is a great example of how we can test things here that could be scaled, that are scalable, and could help beyond, help the whole world. And that's not to say that we shouldn't also be supporting projects. I know, Brady, you're seeing things down in South America all the time. Your eyes are open to what other possibilities there are in the world. And I really understand where you're coming from with that question. But I think I would like to see more about that, kind of to the questions you asked us to answer here. I'm interested, agricultural land management and climate preparedness. There's this intersection of ecological interests and how we can also connect farmers to more resources And all of this is with an eye. If we talk about a project like this where we're growing wild herbs, and I mean, we also have an eye to cash crops and sort of indigenous wisdom. I mean, there are a lot of things that can kind of converge on a project like this. I have no skin in the game on that project in particular, but I'm very excited to hear examples like this. And I think it would be good for us as a city to explore how, because we have these roots in industry and health and wellness and agriculture, and we have a very strong regenerative agriculture movement here. We have Mad Ag is based here. They're educating farmers all over the country about cover crops and no-till, as well as grazing management. We have dryland ecoecology. We have Yellow Barn Farm. We have Elk Run. We have what is it, Mama Grass. We just have a strong regenerative agriculture community. So if that community can be tied in to this climate, to fire resilience, I think there's a real there, and climate preparedness in general. Yeah, I think we should continue to explore where the public-private partnerships and feasibility studies could be leveraged for our good here in this community, and then also not only set an example, but have things that are ready to scale and share out with other communities, agricultural communities, and land use cases here in the United States and around the world.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Brian, do you want to speak to that a little bit? We just had an interesting meeting about increasing seating and piloting potential. No. You love that meeting.
Well, in the context of some of the restoration projects, we're just looking for ways to diversify our ability to grow plants from seed, especially native plants, and options including external vendors, both locally, working with our agricultural tenants on open space land, regionally, other grow out facilities, and potentially even producing some additional growing facilities that our own staff would operate on an annual basis. So we're looking towards all kinds of options to create sources for plants, because that's a recognized bottleneck when you go into restoring some of these really heavily degraded agricultural lands. And then some of the other work you're talking to, I think, is maybe not directly in line with climate resilient ag land, because we're really focused here on the wind erosion piece, but we hear you, your point about regenerative ag. I think we do have a lot of interesting work going on in the department through Heather Swanson's RS Resource Stewardship Service Area, and Andy Pelster's agricultural program, and Lauren Kolb in particular I'm thinking of. And I guess a heads up, we do have the Soil Revolution Conference in town. I believe it's tomorrow. So registration may be sold out, but if you're interested, see if you can find your way in.
Viva la revolution. I I will check that out. I was supposed to be leaving town tomorrow, but am staying one extra day because I have a sick child in my family right now. So anyway, I might try to pop my head in there if I can get some time. Thank you.
Yeah, Heather just said you could probably join remotely or virtually.
Oh, perfect. That even better. Yes, and please let me know if there's anything I can do to help make those introductions if they aren't already available to you, or however I can support on that front. I'm happy to do so.
Thanks. I want to thank you, Brian, for coming back and presenting back to the board the actions that you've been taking on the climate plan. And, you know, it's nice to hear from you a year later and see all the things that you've been up to. I think the fact that we have an Alicia at all, you know, as our climate plan implementation coordinator, and a Paul Dennison, who's dedicated a dedicated resource for wildfire prevention or program manager, speaks a lot to our commitment to our plan. And it's really nice to be able to actually see the work that you're doing. So from a communications perspective, it's really great to hear what you're actually piloting and you're doing. I guess just one comment, and maybe it fits under number 3 of red flags in the current plan. You had a slide in there, Brian, about reducing emissions from travel. And I like also, by the way, that you're weaving in our work with our strategic plan initiative 7C. that we're working on this year. But you said that, and specifically the item reducing emissions through visitation. You have, I think, a tagline or some kind of thing that I honed in on that said, maybe it was maybe the slide after that. Yeah, that one, I think it is. So your first one says potential reduction strategies, parentheses, within control and within policy. I think that, yeah, definitely that's within our control. But I guess I would say that that the department should also be bold and challenge existing policies. You know, we can sit on the sidelines and say, yeah, we want to conform to existing policies, but we can also say for the greater good that we'll be, you know, we're willing to do the hard work to challenge existing policy. So that's my main encouragement. So to please do so if you feel that that's an area where we can make progress. Thank you both.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And congratulations.
I do want to say I love this vision of the biochar. Like we've got everything, our chainsaws running with the biochar facility, and then we all can go to the copper roofed bathrooms and Chautauqua. Harmon, I love it when you start painting these pictures. It's so vivid for me in my mind. And then we can all we can all make our herbal tinctures from wild herbs grown in our agroforest lands. I mean,
So
this is
bold.
the city I want to live in. Okay, guys. So let's keep going.
All right. Well, the last part of the meeting is really kind of winding down our year, a time of reflection, a time of kind of getting in touch with why we're all here, and a couple of a couple of special things for you all. One is sort of montage of our wildlife cameras that we have around the system, and so we're going to bring that up in just a bit. Give you a year in review, some highlights from that. We're also going to spend about 15 minutes or so with our deputies going round robin to give you a flavor of some of our 2024 highlights and accomplishments. We did that at an all-staff a couple of weeks ago, and that got brought up with Michelle saying, you know, it's end of the year, it'd be great to hear. And we're like, yeah, we just did that, perfect. So those are the next two items to come, and it's all sort of in celebration of our year together. And I just want to use this opportunity to say just thank you for a wonderful year. That partnership feels really good. I've learned a lot from you. I hope you've learned a lot from us. And I love the synergy that is going on with our collective partnership, and just an opportunity for me to say thank you for your volunteerism over the past year, and wish you well for the year ahead, and hope your holidays are wonderful. And with that, we'll bring forward our last two remaining items. And Heather, am I turning this over to you, or are we going to go right to Christian? I think you can turn it right over to Christian. All right, Christian Nunes, it's all yours. Ah, good, it worked. It didn't work, you're muted.
Okay, my apologies. Thanks, Dan, for the introduction. I'm Christian Nunes, a wildlife ecologist here at OSMP. And as Dan mentioned, I'm going to share with you a little video of a little montage of all the highlights of our wildlife remote cameras that are out on the system. Before we press play, I want to just give you a little bit of background on what wildlife remote cameras are and how we use them. They're battery operated cameras that are out on the system 24 hours a day, every single day of the year. And so they really help capture all sorts of different species and behaviors and insights that we might not normally get. Over the past 15 years, we've been using these cameras, and they've captured about 98,000 photos that we all have in a database, so we can keep track of what species have been seen and what time of day they're seen, and look at activity patterns, all sorts of different metrics. We've detected 134 species. That's mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, even invertebrates like butterflies. We'll capture photos of those. We use the technology to obtain baseline information on new properties. So we want to go out there and inventory what's there at places such as Lippincott Ranch or the Fort Chambers Poor Farm property. We use the cameras to study the use of travel corridors like underpasses, under highways by wildlife to determine the presence absence of sensitive or hard to detect species like badgers, Preppel's meadow jumping mouse, and beavers. So with that, that's just a little introduction to our kind of remote camera program. And now Sam is going to bring up the video. So sit back and relax and enjoy the montage.
Great. Thank you. Is there any questions for Christian? Any curiosities or okay?
What was the biggest surprise that you caught? Like those were the dramatic ones, but were there any surprise species or anything that we captured that we didn't expect this year?
Yeah, these are definitely like the neat video clips. Probably the most interesting, the rarest species that we captured was a spotted skunk. Most folks that are familiar with skunks in the neighborhoods, that's the common striped skunk, and the western spotted skunk is much more rare. We've only captured, I think, 3 photos ever of that species on the system, so that was a nice addition. Yeah, nothing. That's about it that comes to mind. So yeah.
Yeah, that was really cool. Thank you.
I second. That was super fun. We have so many beautiful creatures living here in our open spaces.
Oh yeah.
All right. Thanks, Christian, for putting that together for us. Really appreciate it. All right. So kind of continuing with our celebration theme as we wrap up the year, we want to just spend about 15 minutes highlighting some of our open space mountain park department's accomplishments. And before I turn it over, I think Jeff Haley and his service area is going to go first. We're going to do a little round robin. We have 4 service areas, just to remind you, with Heather, Janelle, Lauren Kilcoyne, and Jeff representing each service area, and they'll probably, they can do their own introduction in that. But I just want to say that we're just going to give you a very quick, a few highlights. We have hundreds of projects that we take on every given year. Some of them are our core services that we do every single year, every single day. Some of them are very discrete projects. And those tend to be the ones that come to you, kind of like the discrete projects. And but hopefully by giving you education and outreach programming, you get a flavor for what we're doing on a daily basis. So today's just sort of the tip of the iceberg of giving you a flavor of some of the work that's to be done. But I guess this is also my opportunity to thank our staff. It's such a privilege to be able to work for an organization with, and somebody alluded to our budget and compared to some national parks, what a privilege it is to be able to have so many professionals to be working with on a daily basis who are sort of at the top of their field, and they bring that expertise to work every day, and it's reflected in the projects and the quality. And so, again, not only thanking our volunteers and our board, but just thanking the staff for every day making it a pleasure to walk through the doors. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Jeff Haley to get us started.
Yeah, and so what you see on the image here, actually, we had our staff do a little exercise where we left this kind of sheet of paper on the wall and just almost like a kind of leave a note where we said, hey, share a kudos or highlight something. And so it's pretty encouraging and compelling to see all the staff come through and write sticky notes about all the things that stood out to them. But if you go to the next slide, Sam, just with regard to visitor experience and infrastructure, I mean, to echo what Dan said, it's a privilege and an honor to even stand up here and be able to represent that team. We have dozens of full-time staff and even more temporary staff every season. And the quality of people that we work with is just incredible. I mean, even folks on our temporary staff have PhDs and they've have so many life experiences they bring to their role that just makes open space an amazing place to be. And as you all heard, we have 6 million visits per year. And so our team is continuously supporting that, as well as using infrastructure to support our ecological priorities as well. So just a few key images here. The large bucket that you see there, that's actually that Touch a Truck event that we had last month that we mentioned at OSBT. So that was kind of a highlight. Marshall Mesa Trailhead, as you're all very familiar, we've worked on this season, coordinating with DRMS. And that 3D image that you see is a kind of a depiction of what the new trailhead will look like. But just an example of a lot of work that's gone into that project that will come to fruition this year. We had a lot of trail work, obviously. You all were involved with North Sky Trail, but now we've moved to the Boulder Valley Ranch. So the Cobalt Trail recently opened. We've worked on the Eagle and Sage trails in that area. And what's interesting here, just again, back to equity and really looking at accessibility, a lot of the trails we're doing in Boulder Valley Ranch are adaptive bike spec. So as you see here, some of our staff out enjoying that. You can use adaptive mountain bikes, which is pretty new and isn't very well provided throughout the Front Range. So that was a cool project. We have a lot of work even up in Gun Barrel in our Vesper Trail. That's where we had the burrowing owls this season as we opened that trail. So that was a highlight project too. But also the work we've done even outside of infrastructure, as you all have seen the past few months with our human dimensions and our rec stewardship team. We've done a variety of the POV survey, the visitation data, the trail monitoring, which is really helpful, that I'd like to highlight. And then other trailhead projects. This is Cottonwood Trailhead that we've done a renovation. You can kind of see how the new curb and gutter there and some drainage improvements. The folks there at the table are actually taking the surveys they talked about just a second ago with the POVs. And then the new Flagstaff Gateway Monument was a really fun project that's kind of been several years in the making to update infrastructure up there. The last thing I want to mention, just our facility and fleet. Brian and Alicia talked a little bit about our facilities team, but we've done a variety of electrification upgrades and basically getting more EV chargers that we can have more electric vehicles in our fleet, again, to focus on the climate goals. And the last thing I'll mention is just leveraging our tax dollars and our local funding with grants and opportunities. Our team in particular has brought in about a 1.7 million this year in grants for Mount Sanitas, for EV chargers, the electrification project. We also just got word that we have about 143,000 for Youth Corps to hire youth to do a lot of trail work next season. So again, just the tip of the iceberg, a few key highlights, nice photos, but I'm just a spokesperson. It's all the people that make all this work amazing every year, and I'm just kind of spreading the message. So yeah.
Thanks for presenting that. You've accomplished a lot this year.
All right, who's next? Heather.
Hi. So I have the pleasure of representing the Resource Stewardship Service Area. So this is our Ag and Water Stewardship Work Group, our Vegetation Stewardship, and our Ecological Stewardship Work Group. And for this annual report out, I'm also going to be talking about some of the accomplishments of the Science and Climate Resilience team that you just heard from a subset of their staff just a minute ago. So a lot of our work groups have a lot of work that may be far out in properties that don't receive a lot of visitation, isn't highly visible to the public all of the time, but in a lot of cases is either keeping things operating, protecting our natural resources, or helping to shore up or restore the ecosystems on our properties. So I'm just going to kind of throw out some of those accomplishments to you, many of which you won't have heard of, we may not have discussed with you before. And like I said, lots of times are largely invisible to visitors unless they're sort of really keyed into the specific land management things that are going on. So our Ag and Water Stewardship group, along with our wildlife group, were able to remove up to 5 miles of they were able to remove more than 5 miles of fencing. And this was old fencing that was either in disrepair and was no longer needed. A lot of this was up north, places like Joder Ranch, whereas we're putting the trail system in there, a lot of the fencing from previous land uses and owners is unneeded and is not only sort of trash on the landscape, but also can be real impediments to wildlife movement. Our Ag and Water Stewardship installed 1.5 miles of new fencing and responded to 47 responses for rapid response for fence repairs. A lot of those are when people drive their cars through our fences. And if we have cows on the property, obviously there's some urgency to that. Our ag staff oversaw the leasing of 16,000 acres to 29 local producers and everything that comes along with managing those leases and helping to support those producers in their work. We reduced prairie dog conflict using our new in-house crew, and this is something that you are aware of, that and we talked about this last night at the Prairie Dog Management Meeting. We're able to bring that capacity in-house and make some pretty fantastic progress this year on removing prairie dogs from irrigated agricultural lands. And as part of that, we completed restoration on over 300 acres of agricultural lands. As far as ditch maintenance is concerned, our water infrastructure and stewardship group did maintenance, veg removal, and cleaning on 92,560 feet of ditch, which is over 17 miles. Most of that work occurs within about a 2 to 3 month period in the late winter leading up to the water season. So they're moving pretty fast through those ditches to do that maintenance. They also removed more than 80 tons of ditch spoils from open space land and hauled them off. Some of those were a result of the work that open space did, but a lot of it was the work that ditch companies, private ditch companies did. And removing those spoils helps with wildfire mitigation. Those are potential fuels for wildfire, as well as harboring weed seeds and suppressing native vegetation. So now moving to our veg stewardship group. Our IPM staff treated or removed weeds on over 4,906 acres in 2024. And they did rapid assessment mapping on over 1,100 acres. And that's sort of a periodic thing that hits different properties in different years. So this year they covered 1,100 acres, really just walking back and forth across those entire 1,100 acres to map the weed infestations. Our forestry crews thinned 153 acres of forest. We were able to expand the tall oak grass grazing for controlling the non-native tall oak grass into the NCAR property, which is something that we've been working on for several years, as well as experimenting with introducing a fall grazing, a short grazing period in the Shanahan Ridge area. And a big one, the picture up on the upper left just looks like a flat spot on the land, which is the point. This is the Vara Pit, which is down in the southern part of our system, in the southern grasslands. And this was a very large pit that had been excavated previously before open space owned it. And when we took over management of those lands, we took over the remediation of that pit. So for the last 25 years, we have been finding clean fill, putting material into that pit. It is finally full, and now it is graded, and it is no longer a pit. And hopefully in 2025, we can be working with DMRS to take the permitting obligations off of that pit. So that was actually looks like not much, but is actually a huge accomplishment that's been going on for decades. Our ecological stewardship work groups, Brian had alluded and Alicia alluded to some of the seed grow outs, but we also do a lot of grow outs of vegetation material that we take cuttings from. So largely this is for wetland restorations and other upland restorations with shrubs. And so in 2024, we worked with growers and on our own did a grow out of 575 peachleaf willow and cottonwoods. And what's important about this is not only that it provides us with the plant material that we need, but it really is our local genotypes, which we can't get commercially from growers. Also, 3,500 feet of fencing was converted to wildlife friendly fencing. So we are slowly working our way in the most important areas. You can see the elk standing next to the fence to make our kind of legacy fencing more passable by wildlife. And we are getting close to having retrofitted the entire Coal Creek corridor, which is where we have a fairly large herd of elk that is now spending time year round in the southern grasslands going back and forth across that fence. So that'll really make a difference for them. And then our science and climate resilience group, as you saw, they published the climate plan, which was a big accomplishment for them. Our research program awarded 5 research grants and more than 20 research permits to outside researchers. We added the wildfire resilience program manager who was hired, George Greenwood, just recently to help support 8 different departments in the city in their wildfire resilience implementation and planning. And the Wildland Urban Interface mowing project on the lower left, this is at Chautauqua, where you all were able to sort of visit and see that program firsthand. But with the help of our volunteer service learning group as well as Ready to Work, they were able to mow in this pilot year 5.75 miles and 21 acres of vegetation, mostly grassy vegetation up right against neighborhoods in that wildland urban interface. So anyway, a lot of work done by a lot of really dedicated, focused people who spend a lot of long days in the field getting everything done. So it was a good, very successful year.
Heather, can I add one thing? You guys launched the cost share program for the prairie dog barriers,
We have, yes. So
and that was no small task.
That's a good
And
point.
we approved language on the. I mean,
That's right.
there's so much complexity to that I probably didn't appreciate, and I was in the meetings when we were getting a little bit browbeaten for not having gotten this out the door, and we got it out the door. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you for those kudos. Yes.
Yes.
Tori and Andy and the city attorney's office worked for years and then months and months this year to get that off the ground. So thank you for recognizing.
All right, Janelle Freeston.
Okay, so next, I have the pleasure to share some highlights from the Community Connections team, which is the Ranger Services team, the Volunteerism and Service Learning team, and the Education Outreach teams. And we'll start with the photos from left to right now. And I will say when these teams are not connecting with visitors, families, youth, and volunteers, these are the things they wanted to highlight for 2024. So that first upper left photo, that's a photo of our staff receiving an award from the Colorado Open Space Alliance, which we know as COSA. It's their Blue Grandma Award for Outstanding Visitor Engagement for our Out in Nature program, which we call OIN. And this was a program that was developed to help reduce the barriers between LGBTQ plus that community in 2022, and to try to create a more welcoming space in the outdoors. And it has reached thousands of participants. So we were really grateful to get that recognition from COSA for that program. And lots of other agencies in the area have been reaching out to our staff to see how they can replicate similar programs on their open space programs. So we're excited about that. The lower left picture is the Junior Ranger program, which you're familiar with from presentations earlier this year. And they worked on over 20 trails last year, and probably their highlight was North Sky, which is a picture right there. So it's always exciting for them to work on a new trail or a reroute. And then the middle upper photo, that is our volunteer naturalist training. And we wanted to highlight that this year because it's not every year that we offer that program, and it took a hiatus for a few years. So the team was really excited to bring that back, and they have a really nice group of dedicated volunteers, which you saw in Curry's presentation, who are offering hundreds of programs and reaching thousands of participants. So we literally could not offer the programs that we do and the breadth without the volunteer component there. And then below, how many of you read Instagram or check our social media? No? Okay. Great. So our teams, Education and Outreach and Rangers particularly have in the last several years, but this year they've been really excited about some of their social media following and posts. The one on the right in the middle, that's Armand, and he just recently last week was trying to remind folks about icy trails and making sure they have appropriate gear out there on the trails so they don't slip. And then one of the other social media posts there I wanted to highlight for the Rangers, one of the rescues that they had this year. And then I'll continue on the theme of the Rangers. The bottom right photo, that's a picture of two Rangers after working on the dinosaur fire. And as you know, Rangers and many other OSMP staff helped to support many fires this summer. July was a hot month in many ways and a little stressful there at times. And so that's a photo of them. And then the picture above is working on the dinosaur fire as well. I also want to call out for the Rangers, the team, they have their own internal awards where they want to nominate each other for, important accomplishments. And this year, 3 of our Rangers received a life-saving award. They successfully resuscitated a visitor right adjacent to OSMP near NCAR. And that is not an easy thing, right? It's never, you're never sure if it's going to be successful or not. This was a great outcome. And so just amazing effort on all of their parts. And they had just had an EMS refresher course. So they put everything into action, and it just, that with the partnership with Boulder Fire was just pure magic. I mean, that person's really fortunate to be alive today. Also, 2 rangers received, again, an award amongst their own team for distinguished service, and that was to help a visitor who was having a really hard time getting down on the trail, worked with them for over an hour. It was a really sensitive situation that could have gotten out of control, that could have ended a lot worse. And just the care, the empathy that they provided to someone who was experiencing a mental health crisis at the time. So really exciting. I mean, those are just the tip of the iceberg for the ranger teams, and they'll be sharing a little bit more about how many incidents they had, how many, breaking it down to how many violations they see out there. So we'll share that in some of our end of month email updates so you can get a better idea of all the things that they've responded to in 2024. And then finally, those small logos up at the top right, wanted to call out a couple things for the volunteer services team. We were really excited, a citywide effort to get reaccredited as a service enterprise. And you've heard about this in our presentation before. That means that we're recognized nationally as using best practice in volunteerism. So we're really proud about that. And then Give Pulse, which you probably saw an email in your inboxes, huge effort the team is undergoing right now, education and outreach and volunteer services to switch platforms, another citywide initiative to, be able to serve our volunteers even more with some greater user capability and customer service in that system. And finally, with BOSC, our 501c3 official partner, last year, well, in 2023, they raised over $55,000 for OSMP, which they then gifted to us in 2024. And so this year, the jury's still out. There's still time, anyone who's listening online, to give before end of year giving, but they are on track to have another really successful year. And then they will be able to gift us some of that money in 2025 from their efforts in 2024. So we are just ever more grateful for our partnership with BOSC. And yeah, thank you. Those are the highlights for Community Connections.
Lauren.
Hi there, Lauren Kilcoyne, Central Services. I get to start by, Sam's in the room, the other managers aren't here, so I get to start by giving some kudos and praise to Sam's team in Business Services. You all know about our budget process, which is a 10-month process that has many touches here and culminates with City Council approval in October. And that process is led by the Business Services Group, but involves so many staff across the department, managers, project managers, really working to prioritize our work and bring forward something that is the best product for us in any given year. There's always more that we would like to do than we can do, and there are a lot of trade-off decisions that go into that, and we feel really proud of the product we put forward for 2025. Behind the scenes, you wouldn't know that this is happening, but we're also going through a major enterprise system change with our financial system. So we onboarded a new HR information system a couple of years ago, and now we are going live with our new city financial system in the next 3 weeks. Sam and Cole and Megan from this team were trailblazers, and we're on the core team and extended team, and actually just won a City Values Award for collaboration for the way that they've shown up through that process, which is a very big deal for us and our ability to have strong financial management day to day, beyond just the actual development of the budget. We've expanded our front desk hours. So during the COVID years, we moved a lot of things online, but we had a goal of wanting to bring back as much in-person customer service as the public would want or need for our point of sale program. So voice and sight, commercial and special use, woodlot permits, all of those things that people still may want a human interaction to be able to process. So that was a great win for us this year. And then seasonal and temporary onboarding, that is certainly a department-wide lift. We have about 225 seasonal and temporary staff, and they're critical to the work that we do. Outstanding work for this field season from all of those folks. But this team supports the job postings and the job offers and all of the onboarding and the orientation days and everything that is happening behind the scenes to get those folks ready to be here and out in the field doing the great work. In our real estate program, shifting gears, that group does extensive landowner relations and land access work day to day, all of the time. This picture here in the middle is from one of our conservation easements. And so that program did remarkable work in partnership with private landowners this year to steward land. So much of the great stewardship that happens is in partnership with other folks. And actually, the Conservation Easement Monitor was able to get director's team out on a visit with them to see what goes on behind the scenes and working with landowners on stewardship. So really proud of that. And we're also working on an internal project that has a big reach for us, which is our acquisition database. So we're able to empower staff across the whole department to understand the background and the purchase agreements and the legal rights and everything around all of the properties that we've acquired over time. So this is very rich land history that tends to only reside in a couple of people, and we're really excited about empowering all of our staff with that information so that they can make really informed decisions as they go and do their project work moving forward. On the RIS, our technology team, our resource information services team, I have a couple of maps up here. One of my favorite facts to tout is that the open space trail map is the third most visited site in the entire city, behind when people go to pay their water bill and when they're looking for jobs. So other than those things, the thing that the community is most interested in understanding is what trails are open, what's closed, and how do I get to where I want to go on the open space system. So it's a huge lift behind the scenes to keep that current and make all of that happen. The other map that I've highlighted here reflects our role in the division and department work planning. And we showed this to you when that team presented to you earlier this year, but it's our active work plan and our 2024 project map. So the ability to share all of that with the public and with each other has been really important for us. We're also gearing up for our accessibility, the state passed accessibility a law around having digital accessibility for all web content. We made huge strides this year in making all of the content for open space, which includes things like our massive planning documents, digitally accessible for people who might need, for example, if you see a picture, that there's something in the background that describes what's happening on that picture if you have a translation service. So we're going to finalize that in July, but I wanted to tout it here as a major initiative for us. And then lastly, planning. There's a few pictures up here. We're so proud and excited about our continued tribal partnership and our work on Fort Chambers, and having that concept plan come forward and have support at this level was a huge milestone for us. We're really excited about where that's going to be going next year. We also had the alignment, the alignment approved from, well, this group recommended and the county commissioners approved the alignment for the Boulder to Erie Regional Trail after 8 years. And we finalized our management area designations project. So big lifts from that team this year, and we're really excited about being able to move forward. So that is it for me. I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Just one anecdote about the Fort Chambers property that also won a City Values Award. So nominations come in for projects throughout the city, and that was the one that was selected. We called it Heal the Land, Heal the People, and it won a City Values Award. So really proud of that one as well. So there you go.
That was amazing. Thank you all for putting some time and thought into wrapping up your year. You know, you get Spotify Wrapped, we get OSMP Wrapped. I don't know if you bothered watching your own Spotify Wrapped, but it's entertaining, especially when your tweens take over your account. Did you have any director updates?
Yeah, just 30 seconds worth. Just a reminder, I think Sam sent you all an email. Applications for board and commission openings start this Monday, and they go through, Sam, I don't know if you have the date, but through most of January. Yeah. So if you have folks that are asking you, or if you know of people that might be interested, that application period begins on Monday. And through a citywide effort to make board and commission more accessible to more people, they simplified the application process. And so if you or someone you know is one of those persons going through it, hopefully you'll find a little bit of a more simple sail through that process. And finally, I just want to make another plug that we did change the OSBT meeting date for January. We bumped it out a week. And so that is now on January 15th, when we'll all convene again in 2025. So with that,
I just want to say thanks for that recap. That was really nice. It's been a pleasure this year working with y'all, and yeah, I feel really appreciative and grateful for the opportunity. So thank you for taking a moment to reflect. It's hard to do that when you're really busy, and it's important. So well done.
Yeah, and echoing Brady's comments, I also was pleasantly surprised to hear about all these different awards that the city gives, and that city employees can nominate each other for, and I think taking time to celebrate our accomplishments is something that good organizations do, and not many organizations do. And so that's unusual and it's great. And I'm so glad to hear about it. So thanks for doing that. I appreciate that a lot too. And it's been wonderful spending the year with you guys.
Thanks for agreeing to do that, Dan. And I just see how much, especially, having that extra meeting with you all every month, I see how much time you put into supporting our community. I mean, that is a ton of work. And then we also ask you to support us as a board and all of our questions and suggestions and all of that. And you're under a lot of pressure from lots of people who are looking at your your work, and or maybe not even seeing your work, because it's far away, like some of the work that your service area does, Heather, that they don't really appreciate it because they don't see it. And I think people talk about, well, why don't you do this kind of education program, why don't you do this kind of outreach, and like, in fact, we do a lot of that. And so I think it's really important for you to have that time. Janelle, your team has that time every year to talk about your work because it's so impactful to our community. And I don't know that once, unless your kids are going through those programs, or you're seeing how much work goes into it. But yeah, I think, and also I totally relate to you, Lauren, because I do this a similar kind of role. I'm like, yeah, until you need a job or you want financials, like, then it's expected to be there. By the way, I'm trying to renew my dog license and I can't seem to get to it. Never mind. I'll take that offline. And of course, Jeff, like Jeff's stuff we see all the time, and infrastructure, and like that's what our visitors see. And if that's not up to their expectations, we hear about it. And you go through all that hard work all year long. So thanks for taking the time to do OSMP Wrapped.
I'd love to just jump in and also say thank you. And I wish I could have a little cam, like the nature cam. I wish I could have a cam with me when I'm out in the world. And I mentioned to people that I have recently become a trustee for Boulder Open Space. The responses are so positive and heartfelt. People in this city are so proud of the open space, and they really do understand what an asset we have and how well run this asset is. So on behalf of all the people in the city that I've encountered, that I know, which is a pretty broad network, I just thank you for the work that you do to make this all run so smoothly. Thank you for leading the charge on all the data capture, and being an example, and for including the children and our children and all of the diverse populations and considerations here. And Dan, thank you for your leadership and your kindness and your thoughtfulness throughout it all.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that.
And happy end of the year and holidays to everyone who is here, all of you guys. I wish I could shake all of your hands and wish you a happy new year. So I'll just do it virtually to the board as well. I love being on this board.
All right, with that, meeting is adjourned for 9 o'clock.